it in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CQAI monthly National Technical Assistance call titled Spreading the Innovations. The presentation will be delivered by Nova West, which is a program manager at AIDS Institute and coach for Adolescent Quality Learning Network and Queens, New York Links. Nova has a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from SUNY Stony Brook and a Master's in Public Health from CUNY Hunter College. She has 20 years of experience working with HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis C. Since 2011, she served as a program manager at the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute within the Quality of Care and Ryan White HIV/AIDS Program Part A and Part B. A few reminders before we get started. This call is being recorded and all lines have been muted. Please do not unmute yourself. If you are on the phone, please do not put us on hold. At the end of the hour, there will be time for a few questions and answers, at which time I will ask those who have questions to unmute themselves. If you are on your phone, please unmute by pressing #6. Feel free to use the chat room to ask questions and offer comments. Nova, have the floor.
Hello, everybody. Again, it's so glad to be here. I'm guessing that this topic has pulled the most innovative and creative bunch. So I'm very excited about this topic because, I don't know, innovation just makes me excited that something new and fresh is coming on the horizon. So just want to share about our learning objectives. So this presentation, we will discuss the concept of innovation and how to spread those innovations. We often say in quality improvement that it involves change, and change is often difficult, and it's even more difficult when it comes to spreading those new things that will need to be done. So we will be discussing how to take a best practice or successful improvement effort for the rest of your program and beyond. First, we will examine how innovation works and how by design it can radiate and spread widely. And we will discuss the theory behind the spread of innovations and key components to support innovation in your HIV program. So we'll review a 5-step approach to spread. So this presentation will be broken up into about 5 parts. And first, we'll talk about analyzing your innovation for attributes that makes it spreadable. And step 2 is spreading the message using dissemination and diffusion strategies. And step 3 will be getting ready to adopt. Step 4 is how to adapt and implement to your local need. And lastly, step 5 is sustaining the innovation. So I first want to just mention that a lot of our programs, we have a lot of excellence that are going on. We have these pockets of excellence that exist in your healthcare programs, but knowledge of these ideas and practices often remains in obscurity and unknown to others. A key factor in closing the gap between best practice and common practice is the ability of healthcare providers and their organizations to rapidly spread good ideas. What makes a good idea innovative is that it's perceived new, it has clear benefits to what is currently being done, and it has the ability to spread and make an impact. While improvement efforts focuses on getting better outcomes, innovation includes the process of diffusing valuable ideas till it's widely adopted. I want to open up to the group. I like to make things dynamic so that I'm not hearing my voice only. anyone has anything came to mind when I mentioned about having pockets of excellence within your program and spreading them widely? Is there something that you have that you feel like your program is doing really well that you'd like to spread? You could just put in the chat or raise your hand, and I like hearing voices. So in addition to putting in the chat, feel free to raise your hand and I'll ask you to share with the group. I'm going to give you a moment to think, but think of something like a pocket of excellence that you've seen or that you'd love to spread widely, but it's sort of contained in one area, or either within your program or you've observed somewhere else. Give you guys a moment to think. Anybody would like to share? I'm going to start picking on folks.
Well, I am not a huge fan of awkward silences, so I'm just going to say what I think is applicable here. I'm Sangeeta. I'm with Prism Health North Texas, and we're one of the subrecipients of Ryan White funding, as well as ending the HIV epidemic funding. So that's what I help support as the quality program manager. So a little intro. And then I would say an idea that would be innovative that I would like to see in the future is some form of standardization of lines of communication that happen between providers and dedicated staff that are working on these projects, because there tends to be a lot of overlap between like the lines of communication used, such as like EMR, Teams, email, in-person meetings, whatever that is. So maybe like reducing that redundancy in a way where like those forms of communication are somewhat consolidated into one, streamlined way would probably be useful, I would say, in the scope working as a quality program manager.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And I see, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Tanya.
Tanya, okay. The extra emphasis on the A. Can you share what you have in the chat?
Yes. So we wrote a grant because one of our challenges was having our patients receiving their HIV care with us go to the dentist for additional oral health screening. So we've written a grant that will bring dental fellows from the Medical University of South Carolina into our health center to provide the oral health screening when they're on site for their HIV care appointment.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks for bringing your, okay, great. Was it something that you tested on a small scale and decide that it works and you'd want to expand on it?
So yeah, we're a federally qualified health center, and so we do have dental services. And so we've always had PDSAs to see how those who needed to go and see the dentist and the dental. We used to have our peers walk them over there, but then if, or the case managers, but then they would leave. And so we started asking our patients, how could we improve our oral health outcomes? And they were like, well, why can't they come to us when we're over with the medical provider? Like, why do we have to have another stop, another referral, more paperwork? And so, this came about through our community advisory board and the feedback. And so we haven't started. We were fortunate to get the funding. We've ordered equipment to keep in the medical side of our practice. And so we've had 2 of our dental providers who will be working with the fellows they're going to begin championing it in May.
Mhm.
So
All right, great. I love it. So thanks both persons who shared talked about something that is probably perceived new to other programs, and it has a clear benefit over what is currently happening. Clients are saying, we need a better way, this is too much. Can we do something different? So I like it. So when we're going to be talking about change ideas, I'm going to use the word innovative a lot, but think about us within your context as, you know, something that you've tested and you tried, and this is good. It's not being widespread being used, but it can improve care. So let's move on. So what are some things that keep us, right? That pose the new order of doing things. So while we understand that innovations are generally embraced because there's value added, we must be mindful that there is pushback to the new way of doing things, right? There are power structures that benefit from the old way, right? The existing way. You have mindsets that are set on the old patterns, and the infrastructure is also hardwired to the previous system. And, you know, there is, if you think about this age, you talk about the digital age, how there's been a rise in innovations, and those kind of disrupted industries for the most part, right? They have found new pathways that circumvent the biggest obstacles to change. So the infrastructures that were like, oh, this is the way we've always done things, and we're going to keep it going that way. But if you think about digital age, you think about the smartphone, how even though the hotel industry would have said, oh, this is the way we've done it. We kind of have we own this space. The smartphone, what it did, it circumvented that. They couldn't even push back and say, we want to still be the middle person between you providing your place as a sort of hotel and controlling that. But the smartphone was able to circumvent that using like Airbnb and different apps like that. And also you think about the taxi industry has been circumvented by Uber. Now we all kind of hold the power to what service, more power, I should say, about what service we use. So that's an example of how an innovation, it didn't matter what the mindsets were or the infrastructures that existed and the people, the other things that benefited from that order, and it didn't matter because there was a way to circumvent that. And I want us to kind of think about applying that, within your improvement idea. Like, what can you hardwire? What can you build within your improvement idea that could, if there's pushback, it can circumvent that. And it's just an example of how we can build an idea with the intent of overcoming obstacles. So I do want to mention that innovation is not just one good idea, but rather a combination of new and old ideas or existing ideas. And this coupling can make a product or service more accessible, feasible, and desirable. And a lot of times that's what we're doing when we're improving our processes and when we want to bring care, is that you're taking a particular service or particular helpful idea that you want your clients to have, and you're making it more accessible, more desirable, more feasible. Is this innovation helping your staff to implement it better? Because if you're just thinking on one end, okay, I'm going to do this to help the client, but it burdens your entire staff, it's not super innovative. So if you're thinking about the internal structure within your staff of how they can make it even more easier for them, then maybe the client would have more access. So when you're thinking about improvement ideas, and sometimes you can be so focused on one end, either you're so focused on to make it easier for you or the provider, or more easier for the client, and you're out of balance. But either one can really set your improvement idea back. So be cognizant, like, oh, I think this is going to be better for ABC, but it might not be adapted. It might not have the legs to run because you haven't, thought about ways to have your change idea have legs, right? So Everett Rogers did a great job of providing 5 characteristics that he identified that will increase the likelihood that innovation would spread. So let's look at some of those. So you have relative advantage. This means that innovation proceeds better than the pre-existing one. So this is an easy sell. Oh, this is just better. You don't have to tell me anything. I'm going to do this. That's easy. It wouldn't be great if everything is like that. Then you have compatibility. How consistent is the idea with values, experiences, and needs? So we have certain values, like we value client, accessibility for client. Trying to think off my top of my head. It will, it fits within the core of what your organization believes in. So, it makes it very compatible. So, but if it's not compatible with your values, of course, it's a hard sell. Complexibility. How difficult is the new idea to understand and use? So if it's super complex, they might pick it up for a while, but eventually it's gonna fall by the wayside. Trialability, the new idea, how easy it is to test the new idea. And this feeds right into the model for improvement and PDSA, because when we are selecting a change idea, we want to test it on a small scale, right? We also asking our question, we're also prioritizing which idea to test first. And this goes into when you're selecting, when you're trying to solve something and you have a number of ideas, you might say, well, can we test this? But also, the rule of one, testing on a small scale makes it a good, really helps with this characteristic. Observability, how visible are the results of the new idea? So if it's a secret, if you don't have data to prove that it's a great idea and it's making things better, if people don't know about it, then it's a hard sell. It's not going to spread wildly. So each attribute that we discussed is on a continuum. The more of the attribute of the change has, the easier it will be to spread. For example, a change with a high degree of compatibility will be easier to spread than one without. A change with visible results will be easier to disseminate than one where the results are subtle. So here's an example. I worked with the Adolescent Quality Learning Network in the past, and one of our goal was to improve rectal testing for gonorrhea and chlamydia. And the collaborative applied the model for improvement, and they ran some plan to study X cycles. And then the group was ready to share their good ideas, to spread them. These good ideas addressed challenges that were largely due to stigma and provider bias. So there were some of the obstacles that came up. One thing that came up, they found a more desirable way of collecting samples, and which was rectal self-swab. It had a greater accessibility, acceptance by patients, and it eased providers and comfortability in collecting a sample. And they also promoted the opt-out testing. So that meant, offering rectal tests to every client helped destigmatize the test. So this is an idea, like the ideas that overcame the issues that why, clients weren't getting tested. So that's some of the things that when we think about making your idea more innovative, is to think about building it so that it's more accessible. So, one thing that really brought up that the testing was also, the providers would kind of like, they didn't want to bring it up because they actually did not like that process of administering that test. So just kind of saying, well, I don't think this client needs it, probably subconsciously, was one of the reasons they didn't have a high testing rate for screening for those tests. And the patients actually seem to prefer doing it themselves because it's, comfortability. So it's an idea of making, coming up with ideas that are more, that have the characteristics to spread. So one activity that I encourage some of the programs to do is to do a force field analysis. And that this is a good tool to say, well, is the idea, is a change idea have enough driving forces that combat the restraining forces? So you could identify the different restraining forces of the improvement goal that you have, and then identify some driving forces. And when you're designing your change idea or refining it, you can introduce things that combat the restraining forces, the old mindsets, the infrastructure, the system that is against our goal, our improvement goal. So here's another example. This is the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. This is about the 100,000 Lives campaign. So this is the background of the story. So IHI uncovered some good ideas on how to reduce preventable hospital deaths. How many people think that's a good idea, right? Somebody comes in to the hospital, they're not expecting to acquire, get sepsis and die or whatever thing can come against, right? So they want to reduce preventable. So these are things that it didn't have to happen. So that's a really good idea. You can get people around that. So with that, Donald Berwick and IHI launched the 100,000 Lives campaign. So in 2004, at a large healthcare convention, Donald Berwick announced IHI's mission to reduce hospital deaths, stating, "Some is not a number and soon is not a time." He set the number for 100,000 lives to be saved, and he set the time exactly 1 year later, June 14th, 2006 at 9 a.m. Well, he set the time June 14th, 2006. He proposed that six specific and detailed evidence-based interventions. So he gave them 6 specific and detailed evidence-based interventions to be applied, and they could select a number from them and apply them. And they encourage people to join the campaign. And when hospitals joined the campaign, what they were inevitably doing was admitting that some of their patients were dying preventable deaths. And that's hard to have people admit that, hey, we have caused harm to people. So 18 months later, I have to fix the date, at 9 a.m., Berwick announced that the campaign had prevented an estimated 122,300 deaths. So what one key thing, so I'm going to be outlining some key components for spreading best practice, just as IHI, evidence-based idea, or a best practice discovery that resulted from an improvement effort. But I want to highlight something is that IHI and Berwick came up with a compelling reason. They created a sense of urgency, and they put some accountability. You are accountable to do something because there is a huge cause here. And having a good messenger, and I don't know if many are familiar with Donald Berwick. He's a very prominent figure when it comes to quality improvement. But having a great messenger who can command and people listen to and can really communicate urgency is also important. So we'll be talking about messengers also. So next we'll be talking about dissemination and diffusion spread. So now that you have identified a valuable, scalable, good idea, whether it was through discovering a best practice or perhaps you began with the 3-question model for improvement, applied, changed concepts, and ran some PDSA cycles. You now have got something that can go the distance. You are ready to implement it fully. So what's next? How can you ensure that your improvement will spread within your organization and beyond? There are two types of spread, and so you have dissemination. Dissemination is a planned, formal, and centralized, and it occurs through vertical hierarchies. So methods are conferences, seminars, leaflets, peer-reviewed publications, formal dissemination programs, and websites. And they use boundary spanner. So those are individuals with social ties, both within the organization and the outside world, and with a relevant link to the particular innovation. They're willing to link the two. So this is a little bit more hierarchical. Diffusion. So this is an example of this 100,000 Lives campaign. That's an example of dissemination. So where the innovation was introduced formally, it was spread through a conference. The designated organization attendee would serve as the boundary spanner, and that linked to the campaign. So that's an example of dissemination. Diffusion now, this approach is more organic. It's spread through peer networks like a HIV Learning Collaborative, I mentioned about the Adolescent STI Testing Project. That's an example of diffusion spread, where providers share through peer networks, and they get their best practice, and they have people that were going to champion them at their HIV program. But what I want to encourage is that to use both. So both approaches, if carried out independently of each other, would present drawbacks and potentially fail. Diffusion does not have the clout of dissemination. Dissemination does not have the peer-to-peer influence of diffusion, but together they can spark and sustain meaningful improvements. So, Everett Rogers posits that an innovation must be widely adopted in order to become self-sustaining. Each adopter's willingness and ability to adopt an innovation would depend on their awareness and interest. And diffusion manifests itself in different ways, and it's highly subject to the type of adopter and their process for engaging others to adopt the innovation. So we're going to talk about the different types of adopters, and I want you to see yourself here. So you have the innovators, right? The innovators. So there's 5. Let me go through those first. Delve into your innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. Now we could find ourselves in any one of these categories depending on what it is. Some it's when it comes to technology, some it's with a social idea, some is when it comes to something, if they're thrill seekers, or they'll be depending on what thrills you, you might find yourself in any one of these categories. Let's examine the first 5 ways that people respond to innovation. So first, we have the innovators. These are the venturesome among us. These are the people who bring new ideas into the system, those who tolerate risk and are willing to accept the possibility of losses in seeking potential gain. Sometimes their very innovativeness causes them to be viewed as outsiders by the rest of the system in which they live or work. And next along the curve comes the early adopters, less cosmopolitan than the innovators. Their dominant characteristic is that they are well respected by others in their system. They're well integrated into the local social system, are seen as opinion leaders and advisors of others. Because they serve as role models, their adoption of an innovation decreases uncertainty about the innovation for others, making it more likely that others will try it out. The next group is the early majority, deliberate in their decision making, relying on, but also trusting the early adopters. They can be convinced by the logic of the benefit of the change. The late majority then follows. This group is, in general, skeptical about innovation and also is less able to handle a financial risk, if that's the case. They tend to adopt the innovation only in the face of economic necessity or when they face intense peer pressure, and they need to know they will be in the majority if they adopt the innovation. And finally, you have the laggards, or we like to call the traditionalists, connected with, and they're tied to tradition, connected with the past. They will learn about the innovation later than others, and their peer group will be those with similar traditional ideas. Now, I know I made it seem like the laggards are or the bad guys, but none of these are really bad. There's benefit in having skeptical folks when it comes to innovation. I actually think the skeptical people make us are the best ones to help innovation becomes more adoptable, because they're going to ask the hard questions and said, well, I don't know. And it's going to make the person who's kind of pushing the idea saying, well, I never thought about that. Oh, I didn't even think that that would be a reason. Let me be more creative, or let me address that, or let me even start thinking about how to address it and how to communicate your idea better. So every person here, they're important. The innovators, I mean, you know, I admit it's a very, if you look here, we have 2.5% innovators, and there's a reason. There's high risk, and sometimes the risk does not pay off, and they suffer greatly. The early adopters are very key in this group, because they always say the second leader is the one that's who people usually follow. Because when it's just one lonely pioneer out there, they just look crazy, right? Forgive me for using a non-PC term, but they just look out there and you're like, oh, what's wrong with them? But the minute somebody else follows them, you say, oh, maybe they're not, you know, out there. Maybe I should join them. So the early adopters are really, really key. A lot of times I admit, like anytime you have an improvement idea and you want others to follow, try to find a champion. If you're the lone one out there by yourself, before you propose it, you know, sort of validate yourself by having some people who are, you know, are saying, hey, I'm along with it. I know it will work. Let's go get them. So the early adopter is really key. And if you don't have a champion, work on getting one. If you can't convince one other person to follow you, then maybe it's not ready to be spread to the large. So I want to open it up and just to see, put in the chat how many people feel like they're, in general, because I know, as I mentioned, it varies, depends on what it is. But sometimes we have a natural characteristic, like I'm an innovator, I'm a late majority, and I want to encourage you to use the word instead of laggards, because that's, I don't know, somehow the sound of that word sounds very negative, but write traditionalist if you want. So put in the chat who you think which area you fall into generally. Okay, I'm gonna put, I think I've grown to be let me see. We see late majority, we see a couple late majorities. I see some innovators. Okay, all right. See a lot of early majorities. This is looking kind of like the curve here. I love it. Somebody said it depends. Anybody want to share why they selected theirs? It'd be nice to hear from a few people. Raise your hand or unmute and share why you think you fell into any category. And I love silence. Don't feel bad. I enjoy silence because I feel like people are thinking, and I love that.
I raised my hand, but I'll go ahead and unmute. It's Andrea here. So yeah, I just like skeptical. It's like so appropriate. I attribute that to my New Yorkerness, and I am proud of my skeptical nature. So like I'm not convinced. I love that. I could totally visualize your description, Nova, where you're like, yeah, you see one person going in a different direction and you're like, there's something wrong with them. And then you walk down and you're like, oh, the entrance is closed or whatever. And then you have to like turn around and come back, right? So yeah, but I do feel like I'm a little skeptical. I'm gonna wait and see. I'm not gonna be the first one out there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, that's good. I think we need skepticism. Very important. I always, you know, the last presentation I shared here, I think I talked about, oh, what did I talk about? But it was about change, I think. And I really, or resistance, something to do with resistance, the topic was on. And I really think that people who are skeptical help shape. And I do think resistance and we need to expect resistance when we're introducing any kind of change. To be surprised, like, oh my God, no, everybody's just jumping on this. As quality improvement specialists, as QI folks, we should expect skepticism. If you don't, I don't know how. It's just a key part of being a person who does quality improvement. You need to expect skepticism and dance with it when it comes, because I really believe the skepticism helps shape and makes you better. So I think that's good, and it makes it understandable too. Like if you're expecting it, you're less likely to say, "Okay, I give up." So that's a good. Okay, let me see. Kamisha got some late majority. I need to see if it works, or at least on track. Okay, that's good. And I may not have questions until I see things play out a bit. Okay, I like that. Let me see. Anybody want to share on why they chose this? Andrew, you said you're a late majority, but you spoke up early, so I don't know.
I'm not shy, but I'm skeptical.
Good, that's true. It's two different things. But yeah, anybody else want to share? I don't see any other hands. I want to hear from an early innovator. Let me see who Tanya. Can you share on why you're an innovator most of the time?
Yeah, so I like to, and I might not have said that about myself, except recently, some of the team members who work underneath me described me as ready, fire, aim, that if I get an idea from our patients, I'm ready to make it happen. And so sometimes they wish I was a little more skeptical or a little slower and took more time. But if I hear about patient matters or concerns and ideas on how we could improve care to meet our community needs, I'm like off to the races on trying to figure out how to do it, make it happen. And so sometimes it might be, sometimes it's coming up with things that nobody else is doing yet. And so they say, are there other best practice models out there? I'm like, well, why can't we be the first ones?
Good. I love it. Yeah. Hats off to you. Because that's very important to have. It's important to have everyone in these categories. I think we all play off each other, as I mentioned before. We all help move things forward. And so yeah, thank you. So any traditionalists? Anybody want? I didn't see anybody post that they're traditionalists. All right. So next time we have to recruit more traditionalists to our assistance calls. All right, great. Thanks for sharing. All right, let me check. So yeah, we're going to be talking about diffusion curve a bit, and this is one thought that I want you to think. So the part of the diffusion curve, which I'm going to be sharing in a moment, from about 10% to 20% adoption is the heart of the diffusion process. After that point, it is impossible to stop further diffusion of a new idea. So I think this kind of looks like, if you look here first, so once we get to about 20% of the people, you can't stop. And I'm going to show you now in this chart. So this S here, so this, we're using an actual chart to show you this little S. Once you reach 20% tipping point, you can't stop it. And this is where you really want to go. When you're introducing something new, when you get 20% of people to adopt, this is when everybody's jumping on the trend, and it's too late. You can't stop this idea now. Everybody's wearing the hat the way, that same way. So this works. It works when it comes into spreading chronic care model. It works when it comes to a new type of shoe or a new device. It follows this rule. When you map it, and once 20% has start hopping on it, then you can't stop, right? Then it's gonna accelerate to more people adopting. So you want to, when you have a change idea, you want to get it to that tipping point. So 20% of the clinics following that idea, 20% of the people adopting the idea. And when you and the tipping point is put over, it's on this chart is over time. So so yeah, don't give up. Wait till you get to 20%, and you're gonna, according to Malcolm Gladwell and Everett Roberts, it's gonna take off. All right, so getting your change idea to spread. So I like this little graphic here. So you have your idea. It's a brand new idea, all cutesy, all nice and cute. And then you test it out. You do your your PDSA, your plan, do study X cycles, right? You test it with one person, then you test it with 5 and 20. And then now you have a viable, scalable improvement. This is where we want to get. Now, if it's not a good idea and it ends at the first cycle, good. You abandon, right? You do all those wonderful things. But if you did the PDSA as we do the model for improvement and you do your PDSA cycles, you should get it to a place where it's viable, scalable, right? And then you implement it, and then after implementation, you work on sustaining. And then after you're able to sustain it within your initial program, right, initial test site, then you want to think about spreading to the rest of the system. I mean, if it's really a good idea and it's really good, why isn't it spreading? Why do we stop at our program? If it's really good, right? If it's really meaningful, if it's changing clients' lives, they're having better outcomes, why should it stay and die, or not die, but why should it stay with your program? It's good to share. It's good to spread the change. Just like IHI and Donald Berwick, they had some great ideas of preventable deaths. So they decided to make it a real thing, that this should not just be your program or your one hospital that's doing this. We need to spread it, because in healthcare or improvements, it's more than, it means better for the client and the vulnerable people that are depending on us. So it's important to have the mindset that when you do an improvement, a meaning improvement, it's to sustain it and it's to spread it. It should not end at just one place. So I want us to really think about what we're doing, and and if you're not spreading it, are your changes really meaningful? So they're spreading change throughout the healthcare system is complex. So we really need a systems thinking approach. We have to, a system, it's dependable. It's an interdependent group of items, peoples, or processes with a common purpose. And a change in one area will have a varying impact on each component of the system or the subsystem. So we have to think about that. When we have a change in one area, it's going to have impact in different areas that we probably unintended, right? So you have to really think about that when you're spreading your change. Like, how is this impacting the world around me? Since we're not, an island, so to speak. So there are different various and models and frameworks that support spreading innovations throughout the healthcare system. You have implementation science, but it's focused on implementing research findings and evidence into the real world. And we also have the IHI improvement framework, the IHI framework for spread, to support the spread of improvements identified in healthcare collaboratives. So let's take a look at that. So we have this little framework here. You can access it on the IHI website, Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And here you have the leadership. They have a big part in this. The leadership creates alignment for improvement. They set up goals and incentives. They identify day-to-day managers. And then, and so they started to set up, they plan for the improvement, and they find key groups that will help the adoption decision and some strategy to reach all sites. And then they have the better ideas, they develop a case for the better ideas, they describe the ideas, and then they, they spread it to those ideas to the successful systems. So you see the arrows go back and forth because it all works together, feed into each other. So within the social system, we have the key messengers and the key communities and support. We have the communication strategies for that social system. We're going to be talking a little bit of each of these. But just to mention, there are quite a number of frameworks of spread, and this is a general one that kind of applies. And I think a key thing that's going to apply even with implementation science, it's this similar ideas. It's just a different framework. So keep in mind there are two sides to change. You have the technical side and the adaptive. The technical side focuses on the how, while the adaptive or behavioral side focuses on the why. So technical side, you have detailed processes, trainings, you have the policies that are supporting the change. And then the adaptive side relies on people's commitment to adopt new attitudes, competencies, beliefs, and behaviors. You want to use intrinsic motivation when you're thinking about the psychology. Tap into the emotional reward of helping others, and you're engaging people affected by change. You're also sharing real stories of people who are affected. These are some of the things that, when I talked about the IHI's 100,000 Lives Campaign, they had people, one of the things, what helped it to move so fast, they had people who came and talked about their relative that had a preventable death in the hospital, what that person meant to them, and the issue that caused them to have that illness. Maybe they received the infection at a hospital, and maybe, and they lost that relative. And sharing those stories and making them alive and real to people really motivated people to change. So a lot of times, so when you think about change, don't just think about the technical, like, okay, it's very important to give them the how. For instance, IHI, they also had the how. They had detailed guide of how to apply those interventions. That was important, but they also shared stories, and they tapped into the emotional people of why they should change. They made a compelling reason, not just sharing the numbers, but stories. So think about that. When you're spreading change, are you also tapping into the emotional reward, the intrinsic motivation to spread it? So some tools. So you want to assess for readiness to implement. So when you're ready to adopt, you can use tools. There are tools that exist. You might want to do the assessment as a team. Doing the assessment as a team may be insightful and helps reach an agreement on the actions to be taken. There are tools that exist online. One that I know here is the National Health Service Institute, that's in the UK. They have a spread and adoption tool. I have it linked in the resources. And their readiness tool has three things. They have people, focus on senior leadership, motivational and cultural issues. It also has context, focus on the suitability of the innovation in the specific in a specific context in terms of benefits, timing, compatibility with the existing system. Innovation, focus on the characteristics of the innovation. So some of the things that we touched on earlier. Innovations are often not replicated as described, but will need some degree of adaptation or reinvention. So you have to be, and we know with QI, we have to make things adaptable, right? It's part of within our model for improvement that we use. So yeah, implement and sustain the implementation. Okay. So while spreading successful changes is the ultimate goal of many improvement teams, it is important to make sure that you are in the right position to do so effectively. Here are some specific prerequisites that you may want to consider. First, a topic should be a strategic initiative within the organization. Senior leadership must recognize and communicate to others that this issue is a top priority for the organization. This will help staff realize that the status quo is no longer acceptable and that the expectation is for the organization to change. It's important to have a quality champion designated by the senior leader to be responsible for spread. This means developing a plan for spread and monitoring progress. Again, this was demonstrated in the 100,000 Lives campaign. Hospital leadership had to acknowledge that their hospital was negligent in patient death, and this was unacceptable. The leadership of the hospital was ultimately responsible for developing a strategic plan and selecting from the proposed interventions. Also, the success of the improvement team is an essential component of the spread, since it provides evidence that the changes can be made and tips on how to make improvements. So, yeah. So I also mentioned the voice of patients. They are meaningfully engaged. So I think a key thing to remember is that leadership plays a huge part in implementing the change. Okay. So how to make innovation sticky. So what we want to do, we want to make make it hard to do the wrong thing, and we want to make it easy to do the right thing. It sounds simple, right? I love it. You want to make it hard to do the wrong thing and easy to do the right thing. I think a lot of things that we do in quality improvement, that's one of our principles. How can we, so you want to reduce reliance on human memory, and you want to think about standardization, and you want to think about the new documentation and resources. So you have to plan to sustain your program. Unless if you don't do that, it's going to go back to the way things were. Very easy, because remember, we're so tethered to the way of doing things for so long. It takes a lot to reprogram us to do it the right way. So, yeah. So some things that we note here is to document the processes, continue to measure. You want to write new job descriptions if that's what it takes, and you want to train staff. I hardly see any kind of improvement you can make that doesn't require some type of training and education. Even the clients and patients will need new education and new way of thinking. So it's not always just internal, but it's also external. And then you also want to assign ownership. Some people to own this. And I think in general, just thinking about ownership, if you want to really hardwire change, I think everybody should have even a internal sense of ownership over it. But it's also good to assign, the ownership of a project. Yeah. So what teams can do to help? Let me see how we're doing time. So, okay. So you want to help to make the case for change. So I know when we do quality improvement, it's always a team effort. So I don't want us to think, just to remind you that when you're doing a quality improvement work, it should not be one person. It really needs to be a team approach. And if you find yourself being the only person managing that, we really need to shift to a team mentality when it comes to quality improvement. A lot of times, the reason why quality improvement don't get off the ground or don't even get to the place of implementation is because it's one person pushing this thing up the hill. So we definitely want it to be a team approach. So you want to make a change. So you want to help make a case for the change. Remember how important this is to convince the early majority, and you need their help to get to the tipping point. Make the change easy, and make the change easy, and making the change easy too. So remember the importance of complexity and triability. People will be more willing to accept a change if they understand it and can easily try it out. Sometimes when you have resistance, it's because you haven't, people find it too complex and they don't know if they think they're going to fail at it. So really just be mindful. Sometimes the resistance isn't because people don't want to make things better and think about the client, but because they don't understand it and they don't feel like they don't have the confidence of doing anything. So you can just be aware of that and if that kind of pushback exists. You also want to identify who the messengers would be and don't rely on innovators for this, because an innovator might not come. You just want to try to find a person who is trusted. A leader is a trusted person. If the innovator is a champion or can get people on board and engaged, yes, engage the innovator. If it's an early majority person that can champion, whoever will champion it, whoever people listen to, just make sure you adopt a suitable messenger. All right, and lastly, some key lessons learned. So we begin with a successful improvement project. You have something that works, and this gives you good information to spread to others. Important to know when you're doing a QI project, you have so much knowledge on what works. You already have feedback from the client or the providers about it. So this is good information to spread to others. The good ideas must embody characteristics to increase adoption. The leadership makes dissemination of this innovation, the spread of this idea to happen. Direction from the leadership is critical. Innovation theory tells us how change happens, and it helps us to understand how people are likely to react to good ideas. New ideas, don't be surprised about when you get resistance. It's a part of change. And then lastly, messengers are important. So you want to choose the right methods and people, the ones who others will listen to. And here are some resources that we can share, some of the tools, and just reminder that this Acknowledge that HRSA funds this session. And that any questions or comments? Okay. All right, well, I pass it back to Daniela.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in 1 month with a new TA call, national TA call, and quality improvement. See you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nova.
You're welcome.